Everyone, Mr. Hole here for the second lecture. In our last lecture, we talked about immigrants, people like Brigham Young and the Mormons that were moving within the United States to escape religious persecution, or the 49ers that went to find gold. They were moving within the United States during Westward Expansion. Now, today, we're going to talk about immigrants, those groups that came from outside the United States. And no matter who you are, unless you're a Native American, you are probably the descendant of an immigrant. America is more than a country. It's an idea that we have life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. We are a land of opportunity. If you come here and you work hard, you should be able to better yourself. That's kind of the idea of the American dream. So the definition, the proper definition, is the ideal that every U.S. citizen should have an equal opportunity to achieve success and prosperity through hard work, determination, and initiative. So, like myself, I grew up in a poor, dysfunctional family environment. I worked my way up to a manager. I worked my way through college, and now I'm a teacher. That's kind of the idea. This guy, his name is Horatio Alger. During the 19th century, he wrote books about rags to riches stories. So that's kind of how we got this idea of an American dream. You could pull yourself up. Some people call it the Horatio Alger myth, that no, it's not fair for everybody. Not everybody gets the American dream. It's not equal. So there's that side of it too. All right, the groups we're going to talk about are German, Irish, Chinese, and Mexican. Those are the groups, the main groups that came over during our westward expansion. What do they all have in common? Well, they all have push and pull factors. Push factor means what drove them away from their country, and the pull factor is what brought them here. So there's always got to be a reason why they left, because you're not just going to leave your language, your culture for no good reason. There is usually exploitation of labor, so companies saw that these people came from much worse situations and were willing to work for less, and they took advantage of that. There was often a lot of fear, persecution, because they were different, but they always typically made contributions. They contributed to the culture, to the infrastructure, and eventually they'll assimilate. So, for example, your great-grandparents, grandparents maybe only spoke Spanish. They had a lot of the culture of Mexico. But now you speak nothing but English, you are into the American culture, music, and you're completely American. So the idea that it was never going to be assimilated and it would take over the country, that's something called nativism and xenophobia, which we're going to talk about in our vocabulary words. So immigrant, somebody that comes from outside the U.S. Nativism means we shouldn't be giving jobs to these immigrants. We shouldn't be giving health care to these immigrants. We need to take care of our own first. That's the idea of nativism. Xenophobia, we're afraid of this outside group. They're going to take over. There was a lot of xenophobia about Muslims, that they're going to have Sharia law taking over the whole country, or Spanish is going to take over our country, and there won't be assimilation. There's also sometimes a lot of racism. People are racist against these groups. And the exploitation, again, you're a company, you see that we're going to work for less, and you take advantage. Melting pot, whenever you hear that word, that means we're a country that has a lot of different cultures all melting in together into one. All right. First immigrant group is the Germans. So they were trying to escape religious wars in Germany, but they made a lot of contributions, even though some people were very suspicious of them. Now today, look at this blue right here, that's the Germans. So they are the largest ethnic group in the United States. And look what Ben Franklin had to say about them. He said, why should we let them swarm into our settlements? And I also want you to see this. They'll be herding together to establish their language and manners to the exclusion of ours. Well, that's sort of like the whole Spanish thing. Some people were afraid that if they get too many Mexican immigrants, they're going to take over the whole culture, and it's going to be them turning our country into their country. And that's what Ben Franklin is saying about the Germans. He says, why should Pennsylvania become a colony of aliens? Will be so numerous as to Germanize us. And he also says they will never adopt our language or customs. So you saw that map. Most of America is German descent, and yet that never happened, but there was a lot of fear. That's called xenophobia. All right, but they made some contributions. One of them is kindergarten. You may have gone here as a kid. It was invented by this guy right here. His name is Frederick Froebel. He invented this because he believed kids were like plants and needed nurturing. So kindergarten, it means garden of children. All right, Margarita Meyer-Schultz, she started the first kindergarten here, but it was only in German. Then you had Elizabeth Peabody. She founded the first English language kindergarten. And then finally, Konrad Pappenhausen, he started a public free kindergarten. And in kindergarten, you probably read this little story called Hansel and Gretel. It also comes from Germany, from the Brothers Grimm, Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. They wrote the story in 1812, but it was probably, you may not know this, inspired by a famine that happened in the Middle Ages. So a lot of people back then, they left their kids in the forest to fend for themselves because they couldn't afford to take care of them. And a lot of people resorted to cannibalism, like eating each other, because the famine got so bad. So that story where they're in the forest, they find the gingerbread house, and the witch wants to eat them, it was actually inspired by some dark stuff. Now it's a kids thing. All right, here's another contribution. You might be familiar with this. It's called the polka dance. Mario. Yes, of course. All right. Also, of course, that looks good. You got the German sausage, and you have the sauerkraut, of course. A lot of people eat that in the United States still. And, of course, pretzels that you might see at the mall. All right, now my people, the Irish. We came here to escape something called the potato famine, and we built the railroads. But we did contribute a couple things, like St. Patrick's Day. If you look at it, we are the second largest ethnic group, the European ethnic group, so behind the Germans. All right, here's why we came. We came because of this thing, the potato famine. So most Irish, they lived off potatoes. They were a colony of England, just like we were. Most people, they just lived off of the land and worked for landlords. But in 1845, there was this disease called blight, and it ruined a lot of the crops, so a lot of people starved. The British were being jerks, and they were actually making the Irish take all their extra crops and export them. And they had potatoes, and they were selling them. So half the country of Ireland actually moved out of Ireland, and many of those people went to the United States. One of them was my great-grandparents. They came on a boat from Ireland. But it wasn't all fun and games when they got here. There was a lot of persecution. If you see here, people were very afraid that they were going to bring Catholicism, and Catholic politicians were going to get elected, and we were going to be answering to the Pope in Rome. And it was also very hard to get jobs. You see that sign, Irish one. Help wanted, no Irish need apply. It was very common. But we did find work on the railroads. So alongside the Chinese, we helped build the Transcontinental Railroad. And of course, you might recognize this, the St. Patrick's Day Parade, where we paint the water, or dye the water green, and have the floats. So that's part of our culture now in the United States. So we assimilated. And now we're embraced. Oh, yeah, and there's me. I'm Irish. All right, Chinese. Chinese came a lot during the gold rush in 1849. To get gold, but a lot of them never found gold, so they had to work on the railroad. They faced a lot of discrimination because of their race. Here you see them working on the railroad. The discrimination was so bad that Congress actually passed a law called the Chinese Exclusion Act to keep them out of the country. And there you see a lot of these racist cartoons kicking the Chinese out. That was in 1882. So it restricted a lot of the Chinese immigrants coming in, but there was still a lot left over that were building the railroads. And a lot of the white immigrants got very resentful of this, and it got to a boiling point in September of 1885, and there was something called the Rock Springs Massacre. So 28 Chinese died, and there was about 4 million in today's terms of property damage. There was decapitations, there was burning people alive. It was ugly. But a lot of those people, they got away with it because the sentiment against Chinese was so bad. But they did make contributions, like building the railroad and, of course, Chinatown. That's a place that's in New York City, and it's kind of like having China in the United States. Kind of cool. Then you, of course, have your Chinese food. Who could live without it? All right, Mexico. Now, when Mexico lost the Mexican-American War, a lot of people that were formerly Mexicans, now they're Americans. Congress drew a line after that war to make sure that there wouldn't be that many Mexicans in the United States, but that they could also keep bringing in the cheap labor. We're going to talk about vaqueros, but just remember that Mexican immigrants have contributed greatly to the growth of the United States. Vital industries like construction and agriculture have been developed through the labor of Mexican immigrants. In addition, they have contributed greatly to our culture through cuisine and customs like mariachi, Dia de los Muertos, and Cinco de Mayo. Plus, they contribute greatly to the country, even though there's still some discrimination against that ethnic group. And if you look, it's a very big ethnic group in the United States. All that pink area, that is Hispanic. All right, and when we talk about cowboys, we often think of a white person. But in reality, it was started by the vaqueros, who were ranch hands from Mexico. And they actually gave us the lariat, the saddle, and the chaps that the white man did not have. I'm going to show you a little video on the vaqueros.
Somewhere around the 1600s, Spaniards came into Texas. They were excellent horsemen and developed a ranching industry. By 1830, there were some very well-established ranches. Alonso de León, José Antonio Navarro, Juan Seguín, Bernardo Vaquero Celara, José de Escandón, and all these guys had some very, very large spreads that they handled with vaquero team. The vaqueros taught the Anglos about cowboy. When the Anglos came into Texas in 1830, they had those little British riding saddles, no saddle horn. They came in and they see these vaqueros that have their saddles, they have the tapaderas that cover their feet so they protect them from the brush. They had the chaps, the chivarras, to protect their legs.
Vaqueros came from the word vaca, a Spanish word for cow. And the bandana was used not only to keep you warm in winter around your neck, but to wipe down your sweat and sometimes your blood as well.
Alright. So there you have it. The idea of a cowboy was actually invented by the Mexicans, not the white man. So there's some real history for you. So in conclusion, we are a nation of immigrants and a melting pot. We have large numbers of immigrants that came during Westward Expansion for better opportunities. Many face discrimination, and even today, like Mexican immigrants, they face discrimination still. You see it today. Labor is exploited. You see that, and still, instead of getting angry at the companies that are hiring them, people get angry at the ethnic group. Happened with the Chinese, and today it's happening with Mexicans. Yet, Immigrants built our country and contributed greatly to our culture. So here's some questions I'm going to leave you with. What do you think the American dream is? Is it to make more opportunity for yourself, for someone else? And have we lived up to our ideas?